I'm the executive director here in the state of Vermont for American Majority. We're going to be talking about campaign planning this afternoon, going over 6 important steps that I hope will assist you and your campaign team to leading you to victory on Election Day. Just for a little background and a little experience as far as my background and experience goes, I've been dealing with local and statewide campaigns for approximately 14 years. As we go through today's webinar, feel free to ask questions as I walk through this step by step. You can participate via the instant chat. That is probably the easiest and best way for me to see your questions. Feel free to ask those questions as we go through the presentation. And with that being said, we've got a lot to tackle here in this hour. And so why don't we get started? So the first place you'll want to start with your campaign and your campaign team is to take a look at the district. And what that's going to entail is researching that district. So you'll want to touch base with your Secretary of State or with your Board of Elections. The entity, and it varies from state by state. It varies from municipality to municipality depending upon what type of an election you're looking to run in. But you'll want to look and find out where that information is stored. What you're going to be looking for are the historical trends over the last several like elections. And what I mean by several like elections is that, you know, not all elections are born equal or are created equal. Presidential elections and general elections in November are far different in regards to turnout models and turnout than a primary presidential election. The same goes with local elections, whether it be for local school boards or city council races. So depending upon the race that you and your team is looking to participate in, first of all, that is what you're going to want to take a look at and get a sense on. The other aspect that you're going to want to take a look at is how much money is it going to take to win your race. So once you've identified that location as to where the information is stored for past elections and start to put together a vote goal, a vote total, again, looking at similar elections, if you're looking at running in a November general election, you're going to want to be looking at past November elections. If it's in a presidential year, you'll want to look at the past November elections as far as the presidential year goes and start to put together your vote goal and your vote count. Along those same lines, you'll want to look at those same traditional races and take a look at people who have participated for the spot that you're running for, whether it's a school board seat, a legislative seat, or a state senate seat. You'll want to take a look at the historical information to get a sense, to kind of gauge and see what other people have raised, including a possible incumbent if you're running against an incumbent. Take a look and see what other past challengers have raised. Again, to just try to get a sense as to what it might take for you to win. Now, keep in mind, if you look at some past election results and you're currently running against an incumbent who, let's say, has defeated some folks the last couple of elections, one thing that you'll want to see and understand is that you're going to obviously try to set a goal to raise more than those other people did, because obviously those folks were not successful, and obviously there's typically different reasons as to why they weren't successful, but raising funds and spending money to raise your name ID and to contact voters out there is certainly an important part. But again, to try to get a first overall sense is to take a look at the historic aspect of those races in those districts for those seats. You also want to talk with people who either have run for that office previously or people who serve in that role but maybe in an abutting district. Sometimes, again, depending upon the district you're running in, there's a great deal of history available and a lot of folks who have worked on past campaigns. And when you have that discussion, there's a lot that can be gained from prior experience. Oftentimes they say in the campaign world, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. And this goes with your own campaign. So certainly take the time to reach out to folks who have either run personally in that district or have worked on other campaigns to get their sense, to get their knowledge, to get their feel for that particular district. That's going to be very, very helpful for you. I guess, this might be a good time for, opening up some questions. I mean, who might folks think about speaking to in a particular district if you're running for, let's say, for the school board? See if I can load up our chat here. Well, unfortunately, my chat mechanism does not appear to be responding very well. But with that, we'll continue on, and I'll try to work on the chat component here. So, again, if you're running for, let's say, a school board spot, again, you'll want to talk with somebody who maybe was run for the school board out of that seat in years past, or if that person is unavailable or you don't really feel comfortable or know that person, feel free to talk to another school board member, maybe from an adjoining district or somebody who's on the school board from an adjoining district. All right. So out of that, you're going to be able to put together a number of numbers. You're going to put together your vote total, money needed in order to run a credible and competitive campaign. And that's really going to be the beginnings and the start of putting together your calendar and your budget for your campaign plan. These are absolute musts in regards to understanding and knowing vote goals. Oftentimes, again, this historical data is available for you to put together. But if you're working with various political parties out there, it's often that you can reach out to political parties that you might be affiliated with, and they can assist you on crunching those numbers as far as putting together your vote totals. With that being said, it's important for you at this point in time to be able to tell your story, for you to be able to kind of change the hearts and minds of the folks and the constituents in your district. Oh, hold on, I got a quick question coming up here. So a question coming up, when you're doing the research, is there any concern about word leaking out about, if you're running? And that's coming from Laura. Laura, I guess that is certainly a fair question, but most people expect, during races for campaigns to do research. You may not want to go down individually if you're going to be the candidate that's yourself. That certainly may tip off to your opponent that you're thinking about it. Hopefully you might be able to, if this is an issue or a concern that you do have, feel free to talk to your family or friends who might be helping out with your campaign to go down and retrieve that information. The other important note, Laura, is that a lot of this information today is available online. So a lot of Secretary of State websites, again, if you're running for a House seat or a state Senate seat, oftentimes that information is right available online. You don't necessarily have to worry about going in person. Again, if you're running for a municipal local election, it kind of varies from town to town or from county government to county government, if they have that information online. So certainly the first approach would do a quick Google search, locate the municipality or the state that which you're running in and try to see if that information is online. That way you don't even have to worry about leaking that you're possibly thinking about running. And if indeed if that information is not available online, then certainly try to task one of your members of your team to go in and try to retrieve that information or to retrieve that information for you. Again, as questions come up, feel free to post those along on the chat line. Getting back to telling your story, this is really you as the candidate, you and your campaign team, providing you the opportunity to really connect with your constituents. And again, change their hearts and minds and get them to buy in and to believe in you and understand why you're running. So how can you convince others? Oops, hold on, I think we skipped ahead here. So how can you convince others? Well, we'll talk about this a little bit further during the presentation, but as you go and speak throughout your district, I'm a big advocate as far as talking directly to voters and going door to door. You want to, when you converse with individuals out there, you want to certainly talk about why you're running, but you also certainly want to listen as to what their concerns are. You don't want to have a combative approach. People really do appreciate their leaders listening to them, hearing from them, and understanding as to the problems that they're having and want to convey to you. So certainly you're not looking at any sort of combative nature out there. And oftentimes by telling your story, it's not a combative nature. It's a story about yourself, and it's a story about how you're able to connect with the voter. And I'll go over some examples of that briefly. And again, it's about changing the hearts and the minds of the folks in your district. So when you run for office, we all have our core values. And I think it's very, very important for folks that run for office, you need to run within your own skin. You are who you are, and you need to stick with your values. And so oftentimes folks who believe in smaller government, more limited government, have these philosophies that I have before you here: limited government, school choice, lower taxes, transparency. And these are all important points that you'll talk about and you'll shape around your campaign. But what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to connect that message directly with your constituents, directly with the voters. So how do you forge that real personal relationship? And it really boils down to connecting via stories. You can talk until you're blue in the face, saying, hey, look at these facts, look at these tax increases. I find folks who believe in smaller government, less government, are certainly very passionate about the facts and just want to repeat them over and over, feeling that, we're going to convince folks just because the numbers aren't right and we feel that we're right, and going over those numbers, and if we say it enough times, they'll believe us. Well, really, it's not that simple. Facts are important, but really, it's not what motivates folks. Very few people walk into a polling location and have a checklist in mind. It really is a connection. They feel a connection with that individual that they're looking to support. So how do you do that? Draw people in. Look for opportunities. One thing that stories do is it provides an opportunity for somebody who you don't know to connect with you, to see similarities. Hey, this person's a lot like me. And let's just bounce back here for a second before we talk into the ways to do that. So let me just kind of go over an example. I was working, we did a training a number of months ago, and somebody who was thinking about running for office actually provided a pretty good example, so I'll briefly repeat it here. But they're looking to run for office, or they've been thinking about running for office, and they're very concerned about the size of government and the increase in taxes. Well, this individual put together a letter to the editor, and instead of talking about the facts and figures, which we oftentimes like to talk about, but when we talk about it over and over, a lot of people's eyes just glaze right over. He started off with a letter to the editor, talking about the show American Pickers. And I mean, are folks out there familiar with the show American Pickers? It's located on the History Channel. It's been running for a couple of years. Well, this individual, no. Well, we've got a no and probably some yeses out there. But it's a show out there which a cable television show where it's two individuals out there who purchase antiques. The person started off this editorial talking about the show and how he watched the television show, and during the show and during the program, the American Pickers went to somebody's home who was selling some furniture and some other goods, and this person talked about the reason that they were selling some of their stuff was in order to pay their property taxes. And they need to pay their property tax in the next month, and that was one of the reasons that they were selling their stuff. So the candidate talked about American Pickers and just, hey, there are a lot of folks out there who watch that show. You may not know me, the candidate, but you might know the show and understand the show and appreciate the show. And it kind of ties them together, and that you're not some foreign person out there. You have some things that you share in common. So he talked about the show and talked about the reason this person was selling their antiques was to pay their property tax. So he kind of told that story, and then further into the letter to the editor talked about the challenges and the reasons he was running because of increased taxes and the increasing size of government. So, kind of telling that story allowed for a connection between the reader and the candidate. And again, oftentimes these people, folks who are reading letters to the editor, have not met the candidate yet, but it first establishes something. And once there's some buy-in and there's some commonality and some trust there, then they start to talk about the facts and the figures. So that's how talking about a story and using it, and the example I just used was a letter to the editor, can be done effectively. There are all sorts of places you can talk about stories. Letters to the editor, on talk radio, cable access TV, any sort of rallies where you or your campaign might have an opportunity to speak. But anytime you can personalize things, humanize things, people are going to be far more receptive to the facts and figures you then start to talk about. Results, your personal story is right in front. It's certainly compelling. Statistics and numbers are just that, statistics and numbers. Hey, practice makes perfect. We talk about that in hockey or in basketball or volleyball for folks who participate in athletic activities. There's a reason that they practice before going into the game, and it's no different than regards to campaigns and candidates go. When you're out there speaking and talking about why you're running and why you're having a story, or not why you're having a story, but as you're talking about a story, don't necessarily roll that out just on the fly. Talk to your kitchen cabinet, the folks who are close to your campaign, and just say, hey, listen, I got an idea. I'm thinking about talking about taxes, and I want to talk about it in this personal way. And bounce it off and get their feedback. I'm sure, the more the candidate and the campaign talk to folks and get feedback, the more that story and that pitch can be perfected. All right. With that, we're going to dive into districts, hardwiring precincts, and how all precincts, how you don't need to win all precincts in order to win. Candidates sometimes get sucked into the mindset that they need to win every precinct or they need to win every vote out there. Hey, I hate to break it to you, that's not going to happen. folks are going to vote for your opponent. Obviously, your goal, your campaign's goal, is to have a majority of those votes. All right, so you want to, as you've been gathering, as we talked about when you were researching your district, that district is oftentimes going to be broken up into a number of different precincts. And not all precincts, as we were talking about elections, not all elections are created equal, but not all precincts are created equal. And you're going to want to focus on precincts that you can win and the precincts that you must win. And that's why it's so important to do your research up front, because you're going to want to have your vote goal. And if the districts that you know you can win quite easily doesn't get to your vote goal, doesn't put you over the 50% marker, then you're going to have to figure out which other districts, which other voters must you win. So the essentials of this process is a precinct list, a map, and data. Any data that you can get is precious and essential, because you as a candidate, you as a campaign team, you're going to want to focus and target your time. You're going to want to target your resources. You don't have the time. Unfortunately, most campaigns will not have the resources necessary to spend on outreach to every single voter in the district. So as you collect that data, and there are a lot of places, again, where you can get that data from either past candidates or from folks from nearby districts. Again, just keep your ears and eyes open. There are vendors out there that sell data that is important and useful for you. So again, you'll want to research and grab that data. So the 1s, 2s, and 3s. So the 1s, these are kind of the districts that are what you call like the 70-30 districts. These are, bread and butter. These are the folks who really agree with your campaign, agree with your candidate, and you're not going to have to, really sweat all that much worrying about these people as far as connecting with them. There's already a sense of connection with folks in these districts or these types of voters. The 2s, the 60-40, these are folks who are a little more, swingy. They'll agree with you most of the time, agree with your campaign most of the time, or your candidate, but not all the time. So you need to pay attention to these districts. You need to pay attention to these people. And then the 3s, these are the real, these are the deal makers. These are the folks that typically allow you to either win or lose your election. These are the folks who will vote for people all over the place. They don't have a particular, ideology that can necessarily be predictable. So it's going to take a great deal of time, voter outreach, voter contact with the candidate and his or her team with these type of voters out there. And again, there's the 1s, the 2s, the 3s. We talked a little bit about targeting your time. You're going to want to micro-target your time. Again, on those folks that are the swing voters is where your team during the campaign is going to want to focus much of its outreach and much of its mobilizing. And what I say by that is that's going door to door. Well, I know Dwayne says the slides aren't showing entirely on the screen. Hopefully, let's see if I can do an adjustment here. Hopefully that works. So I'll just read what's up here, Dwayne, if you can't quite see it. So it's talking about micro-targeting and messaging, motivating, and mobilizing people out there. As we talked about earlier, you're going to want to try to gather as much research as possible, not just on the districts, but also on the voters and individuals in that district. And you're going to want your campaign team out there surveying those targeted districts or surveying those targeted voters. You're going to want to know, obviously, what is most important to them. Is it jobs and the economy? Is it taxes? Is it education? And these issues are going to certainly vary from the race that you're running, whether it be, again, a school board race or maybe a municipal race. So surveying those individuals out there will help you and help your campaign team target your message. You'll want to spend, when you are the candidate and you know that taxes is the key issue with a certain district, certain precinct, or a certain core voter, well, that when you're having outreach with direct mail or paid media to that precinct or to that voter, you want that message to be just about that issue, again, the issue that voter finds most important. So having an effective database is key. Having that information, and whether it's a statewide run or even a local race, data is key, and being able to have an effective database. There are various database entities out there. Voter Gravity is one that I've used, which is very very useful. But that is an opportunity for you and your campaign team to place that information in a very searchable, usable way. It includes names, addresses, contact info. Talk about their voting patterns. Do these people show up at primaries? Do they show up in general elections? Do these people vote all the time or only some of the time? And again, when your team is out there, you're going to want to collect information, find out what's on the voter's mind, and track that and keep that information. We have some sample questions here that you and your volunteers might want to utilize, again, depending upon your race. Are your property taxes too high? Do you feel that your education system is well funded? Do you feel your government uses your money wisely? Do you believe in private citizens' right to bear arms? Is government too evasive? So, anyways, those are some sample questions. When your volunteers or you, the candidate, are going door to door, I say my rule of thumb is typically you want to keep that between 3 to maybe 5 questions. Most people are happy to answer the door and spend 3 to 5 minutes with somebody there, but you certainly don't want to be asking a 25 survey question and keeping somebody at the door for certainly any more than 10 minutes. So keep the questions short, keep them to the point, and gather that data and keep that data. That data needs to come back to the campaign, come back to the database, and so that information can be managed. I think this is also a good point to kind of note that it's a lot easier to connect with the voters and gather information in person. It can be done over the phone as far as with volunteers. But the rate of success on doing surveys for campaigns via the phone as compared to actually knocking on doors is less. So knocking on doors is always the most effective. Most people are willing to open the door, say hello, and give a few minutes of their time. It's very personal. When you're talking to somebody in the door, you actually see the person that's there. You make eye contact with that person that's there as compared to phone calls, which tend to be a bit more impersonal. And if somebody doesn't have the time or just doesn't have the patience, it's a lot easier for them to hang up. So again, the actual door-to-door activity, far more effective. You'll get much better information and more information as well. But again, it boils down to time and resources for your team. All right, final steps of that. Again, track your progress. As we talked about, information is key in campaigns. You can never have too much information because you could sort the information, again, by voter turnout, the issues that care and matter most to them. And then once you have that information, you're going to want to target your time, target your resources on either the voters, if you're running in a very, very small district, or if you're running in a bigger district that has a number of different precincts, then target your time, energy, and resources in those precincts. Again, if you're running, say, for a state Senate seat, you have a number of precincts. There may be a number of weekly newspapers that run in various communities. There's no reason, very little reason, unless the campaign is just really flush with funds, to be advertising in a community, in a precinct that never or very rarely supports the campaign or the type of candidate that you're running. So you'll want to focus, again, your time, energy, and financial resources in those precincts, those communities that you know that you can connect with, that are movable. And again, at the end of the day, you want to get to 50% plus one to win your race. All right. Now, we're going to go into get out the vote in a minute here, but just kind of wrapping up the precinct end of things as your team is surveying various precincts and spending time out there. On the get out the vote aspect of your campaign, it's almost going to be the reverse. And what I mean by that is that as you spend time in the last 2 weeks of the campaign, the last 72 hours of the campaign, reaching out, reminding folks, hey, this is election day. It's November 6th or November 4th, whatever the day happens to be. As you are reaching out, at this point in time, you're not necessarily convincing people why they should vote for your candidate. By this point, they should already know that they're going to be voting for your candidate. You're going to want to work, in essence, in reverse order. And those precincts, those districts that, again, you're 50-50 with, you're going to want to reach out to them less than those districts that you know are your hardcore supporters. Because at the end of the day, you need folks who believe in your candidate and you feel confident with. Those are the folks you absolutely need to show up and go to the polls. So this screenshot just kind of shows you that those 70-30 folks, your bread and butter, those are the folks you're going to really hammer on to get and show up on Election Day. As we talked about with volunteers going out there, helping out with coordinating, who are out there going door to door and providing information to voters out there, handing out door knockers or palm cards or brochures. We call them different things in different parts of the country. Your volunteer coordinator should try to make sure that the skills of the volunteers, match the task that they're doing. If you have somebody who is really not personable, you really shouldn't. That should not be the person you have out there going door to door. There might be another job. There should be another job you can find for them, probably back in the office, back in the candidate's headquarters. Anybody who's going out there volunteering for a campaign is representing the campaign. So obviously, you want somebody who is dressed appropriately, looks nice, very kind, considerate. It's important that their skill sets, again, match the task. Some people are better doing phone-to-phone activities. Some people are better doing door-to-door activities. Again, not everybody is created the same. Everybody has different skill sets. So analyze those skill sets and make sure you put those people in the proper place where they can best utilize the great skills that they have. All right, getting back to getting out the vote. So that's what GOTV is for folks who are new to campaigns. GOTV is Get Out the Vote. So getting out the vote is doubling back. At this point in the campaign, it is typically the last 2 weeks before the election or the last weekend of the election. Again, the time of the campaign at this point, as far as the volunteer activities go, isn't so much about why people should be voting for your candidate. It should be telling them, reminding them that the election is coming up. Folks who are participating on today's webinar, we kind of eat, breathe, and sleep politics. All right, that's not common. Most people out there, that's not the way they run their lives. They need to be they need to be told either by an email, by somebody leaving a piece of paper as far as a door hanger or door knocker behind. Hey, remember, there's an upcoming vote, or through volunteer outreach as far as phone calls go. But again, this is doubling back and reaching out to the folks that you know and you have a strong sense are your supporters. Again, that's why it's important as you go through the campaign, as you collect data, you want to highlight who your supporters are, who are your voters, because as you did at the beginning of this process, if you're just joining us late, we talked about researching your district, coming up with a vote goal. You want to continue to count your votes because you want to reach your vote goal and then turn these folks out. So these folks should be identified as your supporters at this point in time. Talked about this again briefly, so we won't spend a tremendous amount of time on it. Kind of the reverse of persuasion. On the get out the vote efforts, you want to spend the most time on the folks who you know are absolutely sure going to vote for you. All right? You certainly don't want to waste time trying to turn out folks who you're unsure about, right? They may vote for you, they may not. And you certainly don't want to waste your time, nor your campaign's energy or resources on individuals or precincts that are going to be voting against you. So again, data is king, data is important. It's important to continue to collect that information and use that in your database. Talk a little bit about door hangers. Door hangers are a great use for volunteers. You know, absolutely the weekend before the election, and I would say again, depending upon the size of your campaign, the number of volunteers that you have, I would say in a campaign where you're flush with volunteers and have enough volunteers to cover the district, you want to be going out in the last 2 weeks with door hangers, again, talking about your candidate, who they are, what they stand for, and saying, when is the election, when are the hours of the election, you know, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., that varies from state to state, and then where is the polling location? You know, as we have moved on into the 21st century, more and more people are mobile out there. So more and more people are less inclined to know exactly where their local precinct voting place is. So can't take for granted that people know that. That's information that's key, that should be on any sort of door hanger during your get out the vote efforts. Again, polling location, times that the polls are open, and then again information about the candidate and how to contact the campaign if they need an absentee ballot. We'll talk about absentee ballots in a minute here, or if they need a ride to the polls. Again, those are certainly musts for door hangers during the last couple of weeks. All right, talking a little bit about early voting, and what early voting is absentee ballots. What do folks think out there? What percentage of people vote absentee ballot, do you think? I'm just curious as to what our viewers and folks participating in today's webinar, I mean, just take a guess, either by your state or your district. I can tell you certainly here in Vermont, absentee ballots have become more prominent. And in fact, 25% of folks that vote in a general election, and what I mean by that is the November general election, 25% will vote using an absentee ballot, otherwise called early voting. So it is a very, very important aspect of any campaign. Again, as you're researching your district to put together your vote counts, you'll want to, and you put together your calendar, you'll want to identify when does early voting begin. Because you're going to want to chase your supporters. You're going to want your supporters to vote early, because on election day, who knows what happens? There could be a snowstorm. There could be a family emergency. Anybody that is a supporter of yours, you want to vote early, because once their vote is in, it's in the bank. So absentee votes here, has the voter voted in the past? There are clues. I mean, if you're doing your data and your research, you'll want to see what are people's traditional voting patterns. In most states, most districts track when people vote absentee ballot. So, again, that's useful information. Your volunteers who are going out there, you'll want them to carry absentee ballot request forms. You'll want to call your supporters, ask them if they want an absentee ballot request form. Along those lines, it's important for you and your campaign to certainly have a good understanding as to what the laws are on absentee ballots in your state and in your district. They vary from state to state. Some states are far more liberal on how absentee ballot information can be gathered and how absentee ballots can be sent in. So certainly research that. Most Secretary of State websites will have that information right online. Again, you'll want to encourage your supporters to vote early, and why? As I talked about earlier, things happen. People have real life. Things crop up, and things aren't always predictable. The other aspect is once somebody votes, one of your supporters vote, you can take them off your list. You don't have to bother that poor soul ever again. Their vote is in. You can use your resources, your volunteers, in other places. All right. Any other questions in regards to absentee ballots? Again, keep in mind as you're putting your campaign plan together, look at that date when absentee ballots can start going out, because you'll want to certainly, we haven't touched a lot about messaging too much today. We talked about telling your story earlier, but you will want to certainly be in full campaign mode by the time absentee ballots go out. In most places, I find now, certainly in statewide elections, it's 45 days before the election. So you'll want to have your lawn signs out and your paid media in full force, because it's 45 days out and people can start voting. All right. Well, speaking of that, let's talk about the big day itself. That's Election Day. Just because it's Election Day doesn't mean your work has ended yet, because if you've got your campaign running on all cylinders, this day can really, quite frankly, help move the needle. They say anywhere between 3 to 5 points in your direction with a real good, solid get out the vote day on Election Day. And what I want to talk about here on Election Day is the aspect of called poll watchers. Again, this is an area where you'll want to check with your Secretary of State or your Board of Elections to find out what the rules are for poll watching. Most places allow for at least one poll watcher per candidate or per campaign. And what a poll watcher is that individual or individuals is assigned and sits near or beside where people come and check in. So when people come in, again, varying from state to state, they either have to show identification and or say who they are. Your poll watchers will have a list of supporters. They're not going to have a list of the entire checklist. They're going to have a list of your supporters, because at the end of the day, we need to get your supporters to the polls that day. So as people come in, they say their name. Depending upon, again, technology, I've seen paper lists where people have a list of the supporters, and besides supporters, they have the phone numbers of the supporters, and I'll talk about that in a minute as to why that's important. But with technology today, you can almost use an iPad and an Excel spreadsheet and highlight and remove people as the supporters come in. The poll watcher is going to be there. You want your poll watcher to be somebody who can hear well. You do not want a poll watcher who is hard of hearing. because one of the most important aspects for any poll watcher is to be able to hear the person and then mark them off your list. All right. The next aspect, if you're using a paper list of supporters, you're going to have runners. And what runners are these are folks who are going to take those sheets of supporters and get that information to headquarters. And the runners are going to be useful depending upon how often you use them throughout the day, but probably 2 to 3 times a day. Well, let's go back to the runners here momentarily, and I'll just expand upon this a little bit more. So what they're going to do, your poll watcher is crossing off the folks who are coming in to vote who are your supporters. Why are they crossing them off? They're crossing them off because you don't need to go out and touch base with them anymore. They've shown up. Congratulations. You did your work in regards to getting some of your supporters to the polls. So you're crossing those folks out. They've voted. Their votes are in. About halfway through the day, you're going to have your runners show up and what you call cut the list. So they take the list, and typically a list is broken into 2 or 3 components depending upon how many times you're going to send this information from the polling location back to headquarters. The runners are going to grab that information. They're going to cut the list, and it's going to have, that list is going to show the folks who still have not voted, who are your supporters, and it's going to show their phone numbers. And then it will have the folks who are crossed off. Again, we're not going to want to worry about those. They're crossed off because they voted. So your runner is going to bring this back to headquarters. Here at headquarters, you're going to have your volunteer callers there. This information is going to be given to them, again, either in paper format or, the use of technology today, that information could be emailed as well with a smartphone or a tablet. Your callers are then going to call the people who you have as your supporters who have not voted yet. So this aspect, this Get Out the Vote campaign with your poll watchers, your runners, and your callers typically happens about halfway through the election day. So if you're as an example, if your polls are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., you'll probably want to do this around noontime, 1 o'clock. So about half the day's gone by. Folks who have not voted yet, you will want your supporters to call them and remind them and say, hey, listen, Joe Smith is counting on your support. Can you please make it down there? You want the information for the callers readily available. You want a script all written up for them. Do not allow, your volunteers to write their own scripts. Have scripts for them, and the scripts will basically say, again, their vote is important, and it will have the information as to, how late the voting center is open, where the voting center is, and again, if that person needs a ride. Typically, campaigns will do this 2 to 3 times in a day. So again, if you are doing it over a 12-hour day, let's say, you might do it at 1 o'clock, or you might do it at, let's say, 11 o'clock. If you're doing it 3 times, 11 o'clock, 2:30, and then probably 5 o'clock. After that point in time, in the last hour from 6 to 7, you've done all you can do. You've reached out to these folks multiple times. Again, an effective and well-organized election day operation, that's what EDO means, election day operation, will often make a difference. And certainly it does in close elections. Like I said, 3 to 5% is kind of what is known as in the industry is swaying the vote. And so if you're expecting a close race, and frankly, all folks running for office should expect a close race. You should always run the race like you're 10 points behind. You should have an effective election day operation. So it looks like, happy to see slides are working fine. I know Dwayne had a quick question on that, but his is working fine now. With that, I guess I would open it up for any questions. If you would, just post your question online on the chat screen. Again, I'm very, very appreciative to kind of walk through some important steps to your election operation. A number of things that we did not talk about today, and I would encourage you to go to AmericanMajority.org. We have over 20 different publications that go over stuff that I mentioned today, but, messaging aspects that I necessarily didn't talk about today. We have information in regards to social media such as Facebook and Twitter. We have that both in publication format and then also in YouTube format for folks who rather, watch a presentation such as this. But again, we like to think at American Majority, we try to cover all the subjects that we think you and your campaign would need. Fundraising we didn't talk about today. That's an extremely, extremely important aspect of any campaign, and there are some good, useful tools in the toolbox on fundraising that you and your candidate should certainly be aware of. So again, AmericanMajority.org, we do have some useful information on that front as well. Got a question here, looking to talk a little bit more as far as where we can go to find good volunteers. Great question. Oftentimes try to find out where organizations meet. Also, don't forget you have friends and family. Kind of sit down and put a list together as to who you typically send Christmas cards to or birthday cards. Put together a list of folks who you interact with and have relationships with. I mean, oftentimes the people who are going to volunteer for you have either one of two connections. Either A, they know you personally and they have a personal connection with you. They may not have a strong, real political affiliation, but they know you, they like you, and they believe in you, and you certainly need to reach out and ask them. That's an important component, is asking. People won't necessarily just step up, just make the ask. And it's going to vary from person to person as to what they can do. Some people will be able to give a little bit of time. Some people will be able to give a lot of time. They may surprise you out there. But be sure to ask your friends and families first. And then any sort of other organizations that you belong to, whether it be Rotaries or church organizations, things like that, certainly reach out and touch base and certainly let folks know that you're running and that you certainly would certainly appreciate their assistance and their help. Any other final questions as we wrap up? Again, I want to thank you very, very much. If you have further questions, I'm available to be reached by email. Just email me at Tate, and it's spelled a little differently. It's spelled T-A-Y-T, so Tate at AmericanMajority.org.